The hospital corridor had a way of making time feel dishonest. Bright lights, clean floors, polite signs, everything looked like control, even though everyone inside knew how quickly control could disappear. Han Junseo came only because his daughter asked him to. Minji said a donation in her mother's name would help other families survive what they survived, and he wanted to be the kind of father who could say yes without shaking. He walked beside her with a practiced calm, carrying grief the way older men carry heavy boxes, silently, carefully, pretending the weight isn't cutting into their hands. Since Era died, he had learned to keep his face neutral in places that smelled like antiseptic. He had learned how to nod when people spoke in sympathetic sentences that sounded rehearsed. He had learned how to live with the unanswered question that always returned at night, the one he refused to say out loud because saying it felt like betrayal. What if it wasn't just bad luck? Minji chatted softly about staffing shortages and how the new fund would support families who couldn't afford extended care. She sounded like her mother sometimes, practical kindness, a gentle certainty that people deserve dignity even in their worst moment. Junseo listened and let the sound of her voice keep him anchored. He tried not to notice how his own reflection looked in the glass doors, older than he felt, eyes carrying the dullness of a man who has already attended the funeral of the person who used to make his home warm. He heard the laugh before he saw the face, a soft, familiar sound that didn't belong to this place. It pulled him backward through decades in a single breath, to summers by the sea, cheap convenience store coffee, the taste of salt on lips, and the first woman who made him believe a future could be simple. When he turned, she was there near the elevators, holding a folder like a shield, posture straight as if she'd trained herself never to look vulnerable. Lee Soo-yeon. His first love. The woman who vanished from his life without an explanation when he was still young enough to believe love could solve anything. For a moment he couldn't move. The hallway noises, the rolling carts, the murmured phone calls, the squeak of shoes, fell into the background like the world was politely stepping away to let the past crash into the present. Soo-yeon looked up and recognized him instantly, and in that instant he saw what time had done to her. The softness was still there, but it was buried under discipline. Her eyes were still striking, but guarded, scanning, as if danger had become a daily forecast. His chest tightened with a stupid hope that she would smile the way she used to, like the world was a joke they shared. Instead, her expression tightened into professional neutrality, like she was turning him into a stranger because it was safer that way. His eyes dropped to her left hand, and the world tilted. A ring caught the overhead light, elegant, expensive, unmistakably another man's promise. The old pain returned, sharp and humiliating. He hated himself for feeling it, hated the jealousy that flared like a teenager's, hated the part of him that still wanted to believe she belonged to a story they started together. But deeper than jealousy was the confusion. Why here, why now, why in this hospital of all places, the one that held Era's last breath? Soo-yeon didn't say his name. She didn't ask how he'd been. She simply angled her body away from him and spoke to the man beside her in a white coat, a man who wore authority as naturally as his badge. "Director Kong, the family is waiting," she said, voice low and controlled. "We should go." Director Kong Min-jae glanced at Junseo like he was an inconvenience. He was mid-40s, handsome in a carefully maintained way, the kind of man who could deliver bad news with a reassuring smile and still be invited to the gala afterward. His smile was polite, but his eyes were the kind that measured risks, not people. "If there's business," he said, "schedule it properly." The words sounded civilized, yet they carried a warning: don't touch what doesn't belong to you. Minji noticed her father's stillness and reached for his sleeve, uncertain and protective. Junseo barely felt it. He was watching Soo-yeon, trying to find a crack in the wall she'd built. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped inside without hesitation, ring flashing as if to make sure he saw it. Just before the doors closed, the folder shifted, and a label inside was visible for a split second, black letters on white paper, the kind used for records that should never be lost. Room 4B, Incident Archive. The doors shut. The hallway returned to normal. Junseo's heart did not. He forced himself to finish the donation event with Minji, nodding at speeches about compassion while his mind churned through the last 2 years, Era's sudden decline, the doctor's words that sounded like a weather report, the paperwork that felt like an apology written by strangers. The hospital had offered a settlement without calling it that, and he had signed because he was exhausted, because he was drowning, because Minji had been holding on by a thread and he couldn't bear another fight. Room 4B sounded like a place where hospitals stored what they didn't want families to see, and he couldn't stop picturing Era's face the night before her procedure, how she had smiled and told him to stop worrying, how she had said she'd be home in time to watch the drama finale with him. When Minji stepped away to take a call, Junseo drifted toward the administrative wing, pulled by instinct more than logic. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but quiet hallways make voices carry. He heard Director Kang's tone, low, controlled, irritated, and then Suyen's, softer but steady. Kang said something about the archive staying closed, about her being here because I allow it, and then, with casual cruelty that made Junseo's stomach twist, he added, if you're going to become part of this family, you'll learn when to stop asking questions. Part of this family. The ring. The claim hidden inside polite words. Junseo stepped back, trying to leave before he was noticed, and his shoe brushed the carpet. The voices stopped. The door at the end of the hall opened slightly, as if someone had been waiting for that sound. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he looked down, the message came from an unknown number, the letters sharp on the screen like a blade. Stop walking these halls, Mr. Han. Your wife didn't die by accident. Your daughter doesn't need to be next. His blood ran cold. He raised his eyes, and the door ahead opened wider, slow and deliberate, like the building itself was deciding whether to swallow him whole. Junseo left the hospital with Minji and said nothing, because the words felt too dangerous to speak in a car with glass windows and streetlights. He watched her walk safely into her apartment, then sat in his car with the engine running and the heater blowing, staring at his phone like it was a bomb he couldn't set down. He told himself to breathe, to be rational, to remember how common scams were, how easy it was for strangers to threaten. But the message wasn't generic. It used his wife's death like a lever. It used his daughter like a weapon. And it arrived at the exact moment he heard Kang claim Suyeon like property and saw room 4B on her file. Coincidence felt too kind a word. He drove in circles until the city blurred into wet neon. Twice he almost turned toward home, and twice he found himself back on the road leading to the hospital. A man who has lost the love of his life learns quickly that regret is a second death, and Junseo could already feel regret forming if he walked away again. So he returned, not as a donor's father or a grieving husband, but as a man who wanted truth even if it hurt. Near midnight, the hospital was quieter but not calmer. Night shifts moved with steady urgency, and the building's hum felt louder in the dark, as if the machinery of it never truly slept. Junseo entered through a side corridor where deliveries came in and descended to an older administrative level, where lights flickered slightly and the air smelled of dust, paper, and something stale that reminded him of closed rooms. He found a door marked Incident Review, its plaque faded as if time itself wanted it forgotten. A keypad guarded it. He tried a few numbers out of desperation, and when a generic code worked with an indifferent beep, the lock clicked open like a confession. Room 4B was narrow, crowded with metal cabinets and cardboard boxes labeled in careful handwriting. The desk lamp cast weak light over folders filled with clinical language designed to soften guilt. He searched for the date of Era's death and found a box labeled cardio/recovery. Inside was the story he'd been given, unexpected complication, rapid decline, but tucked beneath were attachments that told a different truth. An incident memo mentioned in 4-bag label inconsistency, a batch code mismatch, and a line that made his throat close, escalated but not reported to family. Junseo's hands shook as he turned pages. Someone had seen the problem. Someone had chosen silence. Someone had decided his wife's death could remain private if it protected the right people. Then he saw a signature he never expected, Lee Sooion, listed as a risk liaison witness to a family briefing. Attached was a short note recommending full disclosure, overruled by senior staff. The date was the night Era died. Suyeon hadn't returned randomly, she had been here, tangled in the same tragedy, and someone had forced her into silence. It hit him with a strange, painful clarity. She hadn't abandoned him just once. She had been standing close to him again, in the same building, and still couldn't speak. A soft sound behind him froze his breath. The door opened, and Suyeon stepped inside as if she'd known exactly where he would go. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired, like someone who had been holding her body together with pure will for too long. The ring was still on her finger, glittering in the weak light like a lock. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice low. "They'll see you on the hallway camera." Jun Seo couldn't stop the bitterness. He asked how she could sign papers connected to his wife's death and then act like a stranger in the corridor. He asked why she disappeared from his life years ago like he meant nothing, why she stood in front of him now like he was a complication. The questions came out rough, not because he wanted to hurt her, but because he had carried them for too long without an answer. Suyeon's gaze didn't waver, but her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as if holding herself steady. She said she had tried to speak, tried to push for truth, and had been shut down by people with more power than compassion. She said that night, 2 years ago, she watched the report get rewritten in front of her. She watched condolence become strategy. She watched a grieving husband get offered a gentle lie because it was cheaper than the truth. When he said Director Kang's name, something flickered across her face: fear, disgust, recognition. She didn't deny his power. She described him as a blade, not the hand holding it, and her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had learned there was always another hand behind the blade, another family behind the man, another layer behind the polite smile. Then she told him the ring wasn't romance. It was access. If the hospital believed she was joining the right family, doors opened, files appeared, and the people hiding crimes grew careless around her. She said it like a woman explaining why she'd been living inside a trap on purpose. Jun Seo wanted to hate the ring. He wanted to hate her for wearing it. Instead, he hated the world that made a woman turn her future into camouflage. He stared at her and saw the girl she used to be, the one who once whispered that her family wanted to decide her life for her, the one who was terrified of becoming someone else's possession. He realized with a dull ache that her disappearance long ago might not have been a choice made freely. It might have been a survival decision forced by the kind of people who now owned this hospital's shadows. When Jun Seo showed her the thread about Minji, Suyeon's control cracked for a fraction of a second in a way that terrified him. She reacted too fast, too personally, like Minji's name wasn't just a stranger's daughter but a fragile life she'd been watching. She asked if Minji was safe, and the urgency in her voice made Jun Seo's stomach twist with a new fear. How much did she know about his family, and why? Suyeon pulled a thin envelope from her coat and slid it onto the desk. A VIP transplant case. A donor identity being buried. A recipient being protected. A list of patients who should be ahead, quietly erased. She said the next incident was already scheduled, and if it went wrong, the storm outside would become the perfect excuse. Jun Seo's stomach turned at the idea that hospitals could sell survival the way corporations sell convenience, the way rich people buy time and call it destiny. He asked her why she was telling him. Her eyes held his for a long moment, and then she answered with a truth that felt like it had been living in her throat for years. She said she was tired of watching good people get crushed quietly. She said she couldn't save Era, but she refused to let Minji be next. She said she had kept her distance from him because love makes you easy to threaten, and she had already been threatened into silence once before. Footsteps stopped outside the door. A calm male voice spoke through the wood, asking for Ms. Lee, saying Director Kong wanted her upstairs. The keypad began to beep as someone entered a code with confidence. Suyeon moved fast, pressing papers back into the box, her breath steady even as danger closed in. She leaned toward Jun Seo and whispered one instruction: don't speak, don't move, don't become the headline they can erase. Then she angled her body so the men entering would see her first, not him, and the ring flashed again like a warning sign only powerful people could read. The lock clicked. The handle turned. The door began to open. And in that breath of widening light, Jun Seo realized this wasn't just a secret room, it was a stage where lives were negotiated like contracts. If you want to keep going with this story, subscribe and comment what you think Soo-yeon is really risking: love, freedom, or her life. Soo-yeon stepped forward into the weak light as if she were alone. The men who entered were not ordinary security, they had the posture of people who rarely hear the word no. One wore a hospital jacket, the other a suit that didn't belong to night staff. Their eyes swept the room, pausing on the desk, the open box, the lamp, the faint disorder of paper that suggested someone had been searching for truth. For a moment, the suited man's gaze drifted toward the shelves where Junseo was pressed into shadow, and Junseo felt his body tighten like prey sensing a predator's attention. He held his breath so deeply his chest ached. Soo-yeon kept her voice calm as she spoke about returning files by morning, about compliance, using the hospital's favorite language against itself. She lifted her hand slightly, letting the ring catch the light like a badge, like a permission slip written in gold. The suited man's expression shifted, calculation replacing suspicion. Whatever the ring represented, it warned him that crossing her might cost him more than letting her pass. He chose the safer path. They said they would escort her to Director Kong. Soo-yeon moved toward the desk, collecting the box with steady hands. She looked composed enough to fool them, but Junseo could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her chin level like she was refusing to show fear. As she passed the shelves, her sleeve brushed the floor and a single page slid loose, landing near Junseo's shoes like an accident too precise to be accidental. She didn't look back. She walked out with the men, carrying herself like a woman who understood that survival sometimes means acting like you belong to the enemy. When the footsteps faded, Junseo crouched and grabbed the page. It was a medication log with one line not fully redacted, a test lot not approved, use only on priority cases, and initials that made his blood burn: KMJ Kong Min-jae. It wasn't a complete confession, but it was a crack in the wall, a piece of proof that could grow teeth if paired with something stronger. He stared at the paper until rage steadied his hands. Rage can be dangerous, but it can also be clarifying. He understood then that he needed more than personal grief. He needed a narrative the outside world could believe, evidence that didn't die in a basement cabinet, and witnesses who couldn't be quietly relocated. He left the basement and moved through staff corridors, keeping to the edges, watching the camera angles the way a man learns to do when he realizes a building is not neutral. He found an empty break area lit by a vending machine and called Minji, voice low. He told her to take tomorrow off, to stay away from the hospital. Minji tried to argue, because responsibility is a religion for nurses, but her voice tightened the moment he mentioned room 4B. She admitted she'd heard whispers from senior nurses: places you don't enter, names you don't say, incidents that become rumors and then disappear. The hospital wasn't just a workplace, it was a machine, and machines crush whatever jams their gears. Junseo told her someone had threatened her. Minji went quiet in a way that made him feel sick, then she asked for details with clinical steadiness because fear is easier when you treat it like a case file. He heard her breathe faster anyway. She said she would be careful. She said she would keep recording anything strange. She said she would tell a trusted colleague. Junseo wanted to believe that would be enough, but he had already seen the kind of men who walked the executive halls at night. They didn't fear colleagues. They feared headlines. As he ended the call, he saw movement at the far end of a staff corridor, a stretcher being pushed through a restricted path, escorted by private security. Not toward the public transplant unit, but toward the executive wing. The patient's face was covered more than necessary, as if identity itself was being hidden. Director Kong walked with them, calm as a man attending a dinner, and beside him was Soo-yeon, face controlled, ring still on her finger, eyes fixed forward like she was walking into a storm on purpose. Junseo stepped into shadow and watched. Just before the private elevator doors closed, Soo-yeon's gaze flicked toward him. For a heartbeat, her eyes widened with warning. Don't follow. Not yet. But her eyes also carried something else, an unspoken apology, and a plea that felt like it came from a place older than tonight. Junseo followed anyway, not directly, using stares that bypassed the obvious cameras, moving like a man who finally understood what silence costs. On the executive floor, the carpet muted sound, but muffled voices still leaked from behind a closed door. He heard Soo-yeon say a donor consent form was incomplete, and Kang's reply was soft, intimate in the worst way, warning her to remember what happens if she forgets her place. Then Jun-seo heard a sharp crash, a chair scraping, and Soo-yeon's breathless cry. The sound was not professional. It was human. It made something protective and furious rise in him, the same instinct that had made him stand between Era and a speeding scooter once, the same instinct that made fathers step forward when danger chooses their children. His phone buzzed. A message from Minji, short and panicked. "Dad. Someone is at my door. They say they're hospital security." His hands went cold. And before he could respond, another unknown message arrived, cruelly efficient. "Walk away, or your daughter becomes the next incident." He stared down the hallway at the executive door where Soo-yeon was trapped with Kong, and at his phone where Minji's life was being used as a leash. Behind the door, he heard Kang's voice again, lower now, dangerous, like a man who enjoys reminding others he can ruin them quietly. "You should have stayed quiet, Soo-yeon." Jun-seo's mind split into two desperate tracks, his daughter alone at home, and Soo-yeon cornered behind that door. He took a step back, then forward again, trapped by the impossibility of choosing. And in that unbearable hesitation, the executive hallway lights flickered as the wind outside rose, the building trembling like it sensed what was coming. Jun-seo ran, because fathers don't negotiate when their children are being hunted. He flew down the stairs and out into the night, the air already thick with wind that smelled of rain and sea, the kind of wind that makes streetlights sway like nervous witnesses. He drove fast but careful, because accidents are also a convenient kind of silence. His hands clenched the steering wheel as if he could crush fear out of it. His phone kept buzzing with unknown numbers, and he refused to look until he reached Minji's building, because one more threat would have made him lose control, and losing control is exactly what predators wait for. In the hallway outside her door, two men stood with calm faces and practiced authority, speaking softly as if cruelty should never raise its voice. Minji was visible in the doorway, phone raised, recording, pale but standing. Her lips were pressed tight, but her posture was straight, and Jun-seo recognized the bravery that comes when fear is forced to share space with anger. She didn't let them in. She didn't let them pull her into privacy. When Jun-seo arrived, he spoke loudly enough for neighbors to hear, asking why a wellness check happened at midnight and why hospital security needed secrecy. The men's expressions tightened just enough to reveal irritation. They backed away with polite words, because cameras and witnesses are the one language bullies understand. When they disappeared down the stairs, Jun-seo locked Minji's door and double-checked the deadbolt like metal could protect them from power. Minji lowered her phone and her hands shook hard enough that she had to grip her own wrist to steady herself. She asked what was happening, and Jun-seo told her the truth as cleanly as he could. Era's case was in an incident archive, a batch mismatch was hidden, and Kang Min-jae's initials appeared beside a test lot order. Minji's eyes filled, and grief became anger so quickly it startled him. She whispered her mother's name like it was a promise not to let her be erased again. Then she said something that made Jun-seo's chest tighten, that she had always felt something was off about the way the hospital rushed them through paperwork, the way the doctor avoided eye contact, the way administrators spoke about resolution like it was a product. She said she buried the suspicion because she didn't want to poison her own career, and because she didn't want to poison her father's fragile attempt to move forward. Now the poison was already in the water. Minji insisted they go back. Not tomorrow. Tonight. She said if the hospital was moving a VIP transplant case during a storm, they were doing it because they believed chaos would hide them. And if Soo-yeon was inside that chaos, she was either about to be sacrificed or about to light the match that burns everything down. Minji put on her scrubs like armor and tucked her phone into her pocket like a weapon. Jun-seo realized his daughter had inherited something fierce from Era, the refusal to accept a lie just because it's convenient. They returned to the hospital just as the storm deepened and the building's lights flickered, once, twice, then cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the lobby for a long second, and then emergency lighting blinked on in weak hues that made everyone look like ghosts. Generators hummed with an uneven rhythm, and a few machines beeped in a way that made Minji's face go tight. In places like this, unstable power isn't just inconvenience, it becomes cover. Minji whispered that ICU and operating rooms need stable electricity, and if the backup system stuttered, it would create medical errors that could be explained away as weather. Junseo felt sick at how easily nature could be turned into an accomplice. They took the stairs, because elevators are cages when the power stutters. The stairwell smelled damp and metallic, echoing with footsteps and distant alarms. On the executive floor, the carpeted hallway was tense with suits and security. The polished walls displayed framed photos of donors and board members smiling like saints, and Junseo wondered how many of those smiles were bought with someone else's shortened life. A door stood open, revealing a private unit that shouldn't exist in a hospital that claimed fairness. A patient lay on a bed, surrounded by men who looked more like investors than family. Director Kong stood at the center, sleeves rolled, composed as if morality was a minor technicality. Soo-yeon was there too, pressed near the wall, face pale, eyes bright with fury held under control. Minji stepped forward with a nurse's clarity, pointing out the unstable power and demanding protocol, demanding to know why a transplant case was being handled here instead of the proper unit. Kong told her to leave, voice smooth but edged, like a man annoyed that a lower employee dared to speak. Junseo held up the log page, speaking Era's name out loud, refusing to let his wife remain a footnote. For one heartbeat the room paused, like even the storm listened. Kong dismissed the page as meaningless without context, and his confidence was the confidence of a man who believed context could always be purchased. Then he turned to Soo-yeon with a quiet warning that made Junseo's skin crawl, the kind of warning delivered without raising a voice because the threat itself is the power. Soo-yeon moved. Slowly, deliberately, she removed the ring from her finger and placed it on a table where everyone could see. The sound it made, metal against wood, felt louder than thunder. She said the engagement was never love, it was leverage. She said she wore it to reach room 4B, to reach transplant files, to collect proof. She said she had done it because powerful people only show their real face when they believe you belong to them. Kang's jaw tightened, and for the first time his polished mask cracked into something uglier, something that looked like ownership being challenged. Soo-yeon lifted her phone and said she had recordings, conversations about priority cases, donor identities being buried, consent forms pushed through like paperwork, not ethics. She said copies had already been sent outside the building, and that she would make it public before anyone could bury it again. Kong stepped toward her, and the air in the room changed, tightening like a noose. Junseo grabbed Kang's wrist before he could reach her, and the struggle was brief but violent enough to knock a tray to the floor. Metal clattered. The patient's monitor beeped unevenly as the generator stuttered again, and Minji swore under her breath, her nurse brain tracking danger in every sound. Security shifted closer. Minji stepped in front of her father, voice sharp, ready to scream for the whole ward if anyone touched him. In that chaos, Soo-yeon pressed one button. Live. Her phone screen captured the private unit, the executive faces, the storm-dark hospital, the ring on the table like a discarded shackle. Soo-yeon spoke clearly into the camera, naming the place, naming the behavior, describing how an incident archive hid preventable deaths and how tonight another priority case was being pushed through during unstable power. Comments exploded. Screenshots were taken. A truth that was meant to be sealed in a basement began multiplying in real time. Kong tried to regain control with authority and threats, but authority breaks the moment the public watches it. The security men hesitated, because once a truth is broadcast, the safest choice becomes not obedience but distance. Then the intercom crackled with a voice that didn't belong to night staff. A calm, older voice announced that a warrant had been delivered and records were not to be destroyed. The room froze again, not because people suddenly gained morals, but because power had shifted, and everyone could feel it like pressure in their ears. Kang's eyes narrowed, and in that narrowing Junseo saw something that chilled him, not panic, but calculation, like Kang had always known this night would arrive and had prepared a final move. Kang's gaze slid toward Minji with cold precision. In his hand, a small blade glinted, something lifted from a tray too casually, too easily, as if violence was just another tool. Junseo stepped forward instinctively, but Soo-yeon reacted faster, stepping between Kang and Minji like her body was a promise she could finally keep. In that split second, Junseo understood what her disappearance years ago had been, not a lack of love, but a brutal attempt to keep love from being used as leverage. He understood that she had been fighting in silence for years, and silence had been the price of keeping him and his daughter breathing. Footsteps thundered in the hallway as more security arrived, but not the kind that belonged to Kong. The sound carried urgency and authority in a different direction. Suyun's phone kept streaming, capturing every face, every flinch, every attempt to move a folder off a table. Kang's fingers tightened around the blade, and for a breath the room balanced on the edge of tragedy until the door swung wider and a stern voice announced prosecutors by name, forcing everyone to step back, forcing Kang's hand to lower, forcing the private unit's secrets into the harsh light of official presence. Even then, Kang leaned close enough to Suyun to speak without being heard on the stream, his lips barely moving. Junseo couldn't hear the words, but he saw the effect. Suyun's face tightened, and her eyes flicked, just once, toward Junseo with a warning that felt like the beginning of a new nightmare, not the end of the old one. Because some men don't stop when they lose a room. They stop only when they lose everything. And as the storm raged outside and officers began sealing records, Suyun's phone buzzed with a new alert that made her inhale sharply, as if the ground under her shifted again. She turned the screen slightly, and Junseo caught a glimpse of the notification banner before it vanished. Transfer confirmed, donor file moved, offsite. The proof. The missing piece. Already gone. If this story hit you, like and subscribe for more K-drama style stories, and comment this: would you forgive someone who vanished to protect you, even if their silence helped a lie survive? I read every comment, and your support keeps these stories coming.